So with those questions, you know, I would like to invite Michela, our first speaker today. Michela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bartek. Thank you for this fantastic introduction, actually. I'm already very inspired by your provocations. So you almost kind of distracted me because I now want to talk about some of the things that you've posed instead of what I've prepared. But let's just go through the motions, and we have a panel session later where we can discuss. I'm sure we'll go more in depth in this. I'm very pleased to be here. I was very lucky to be able to, usually I'm like, I land in a place, I have work to do, I don't go out, but last night I actually made an effort to go out and see the exhibits, and it's phenomenal. I mean, everything about it, how it's organized, but obviously what's been curated, and the participating artists, but also the environments. I mean, they are stunning overall. So I got just massively inspired already. So I hope that those of you who haven't kind of gone around and had a look around do that, because everything that we're talking about today is also a point of reflection about all of the pieces that are being exhibited. I have been sort of I'm ex-Royal College of Art in London, and been sort of 30 years in the business of challenging certain sort of preconceptions. But let's say the last 12 years, I have been completely accidentally in a situation where been curating very large groups of artists and scientists and people coming from various different domains to create works that really challenge our preconceptions about how we interact with machines and how we interact with systems. So before that I was in system design, but then I ended up by default with this large community, which ended up sort of dragging me forward. And so some of the things that you will see cover sort of maybe this is, for example, 8 years ago, so I'm going to take little points from this evolution to highlight some of the aspects of what machine missionaries may be about. And the person you see behind me is Victoria Modesta. She's a bionic artist. She's a person who closed the Paralympics in Rio. She's a fellow of MIT. She's in big productions in the US, I think, currently. And someone who's not afraid to challenge preconceptions. And my first point of departure is, how do we project our own mental models on the systems that we build? And this very much is a point of asking what is normal, and how do we actually consider, or how do we define what is normal? And it might be very obvious when we see Victoria, but actually it becomes a great deal more subtle when you start to think of concepts such as normalization, which is a concept in computer science. And suddenly you start to realize that these are deep and they penetrate all of our systems, these kind of preconceptions, these mental models that we are deliberately embedding in systems as a society. And then what are the consequences of those? So the thing with Victoria that we did in Berlin back 8 years ago was to see what else she can be that we can all aspire to. And so she was fitted with neurofeedback sensors that allowed her to control, or to start to train to control, projection mapping systems as part of her performance. So she's a bionic artist. She performs on stage with choreography and singing, and then the lighting and projection mapping environments were an extra, let's say, talent that she could start to develop. And so this was a big challenging sort of thing to try and attempt to do, because we thought, well, is a human brain capable of training in sort of 1 week, as we run this week-long labs where I curate people to come together. And it turned out that by the end of the week she was able to do it seamlessly. So it indicated that it was not the augmentation. Like when we talk about human machine, we think immediately augmentation, with robotics, with like enhancing human bodies and what have you. And it's not the machine that's augmenting, it's the brain that's augmenting in these environments. So this was really interesting for us. We actually took that further. The following year, I was asked by Slush in Helsinki to sort of, I opened the track for them in 2016, and then they said, what would you like to do next year? And I said, well, we'd like to do a week of labs where we bring people together to create stuff that challenges your 3-minute pitch. Because we think they are just one-liners, and I think that the human experience goes deeper than that, and I think we need to create a performance that allows you to experience whatever it is that you've just cooked up. So we put at the center of our, there was 30 people that we gathered that time, and all kinds of backgrounds, and we put at the center a person. She's a vocal coach from the Sibelius Academy, and very proud to be a blind singer. And we started really simply. We didn't start with preconceptions. We've learned this over the years. We work a lot with what you might call accessibility, but basically, again, questioning the idea of, who is normal and who is the person we need to aspire to. And we asked Rika, this is Rika Hanninen, we asked her, what would you like to happen in this week? And she said something very simple. She said, well, I would like to know how the audience feels when I'm singing. She's a phenomenal singer, because I can't see them. So that was something that we could do very simply. Of course, we sort of augment ourselves or augment the audience. We asked for members of the audience to volunteer. And we thought, they're not going to react because they are there to schmooze with the investors and what have you. And there was like a rush for the stage. We said, can you volunteer to be fitted with a pulse sensor so that you can communicate to the singer? And they all wanted to do that. And this was just so simple. It's like cheap, simple technology. But of course, this paradigm shift in how you start to communicate using these simple means, creating channels of communication that never happened before, obviously is very significant. It's something that we have been experiencing in general in society, for better or for worse. But then, of course, we took this idea of the neurofeedback sensor forward, and our neurofeedback team adapted a system from clinical trials for people with anxiety attacks. So what they do in clinical trials is that when you suffer from anxiety attacks, the brain pattern tends to change before you realize it. And so if you can visualize it for the patient, and if they can see that their brain pattern is starting to alter, you could start to train to control it. Except that instead, they actually changed it to play the musical scale. And so suddenly you could start to train to control the musical scale. And then people sat in our labs for like a couple of hours. They were trying to train to do this. And then after a couple of hours, they would start to be able to move up and down the musical scale directly from their brain, which is already pretty amazing, because if you think about it, how plastic our brain is and how much we need to normally train motorics as well, like the brain-to-hand kind of interaction with instruments. But then Rika put the neurofeedback sensor on, and she was able to play instantly. And all of a sudden, there was this person who was in the, let's say, mechanical era, with the tools that we gave them, considered less able-bodied than the rest of us. Suddenly, this was the person who was able-bodied. And she was far more talented than the rest of us. And then, of course, the penny dropped that we need to actually really think about the future of work and how do we do all these things. I mean, I advise the European Commission about these things, and I take it directly from grassroots experimentation. I take it from this and I show it to them. It's now called evidence-based policy. These experimentations are called evidence-based policy. Because if you think about it, before someone invented the piano, there was no such thing as pianist virtuoso. And of course, we don't think about it when we design technologies. Or rather, most people who are tasked to do that, they don't think about it. Now, these kinds of mental models that we project onto things, I mean, it does come from our preconceptions, and if we can alter these preconceptions, we can demonstrate that things may actually work differently, we actually may start to design things differently. So, technologies are machines. I mean, They are attached literally at the hip to you right now. And you walk with it everywhere, and you can't live without it. And one of the systems that you use on a daily basis is this one. This square of blue is part of a system, a value system that we have created, the most commonly used value system, which is the mapping system. And it is very interestingly devoid of value on here. You know, it's very plain and blue, and if I actually now start to think about it, if I to apply the same principle that we did when we discovered we could measure land, we said, hang on a second, we could now measure the land and draw it in nice, neat little squares and then sell it, like give it to someone as something that they own, which of course is not something you can physically own, but you have a piece of paper to say that this bit of measurement that someone has measured over there is yours, and someone else is not allowed to go on it. And of course, back in the day when this kind of ideas of ownership and colonialism and whatever started, they didn't have the possibility to measure these squares of blue. But of course now you can, and you could literally just kind of dissect it and divide it into squares and sell it off. Why not? I mean, why not? That's a good question. And it's not so much what's beyond the blue that we're not seeing here, it's what's on top of it. If I show you what is on this satellite image, this is the same square of blue. It's a beautiful 10th centuries of ecosystem of little red things there are houses that float on top of the water in perfect harmony with one of the richest biospheres in Europe. It has enormous amount of species. And they are salt flats that you can see. They've been, this economy started 10 centuries ago because salt was a really valuable commodity. In fact, whole tax systems were designed around salt by the French courts. Now this still exists, it's still thriving. Is of course not as valuable as it once was to the economy, and so therefore we erase it of our mapping systems. But this is where it is. It's the Rio de Aveiro in Portugal, which is one of the largest areas of wetland and incredibly valuable as a rich biosphere, and also incredibly dramatic because of the nature of this place and facing the Atlantic. The city of Aveiro was erased by the ocean twice in its history, so it's at the forefront of climate change. So it's valuable for very, very many reasons. And in this map, most used map in the world, this doesn't exist, but if I actually go to a community-generated map, which is the OpenStreet map, people have drawn themselves in. And so now you recognize it there. And in fact, this area extends the city of Aveiro seamlessly. If you walk out of those streets that are on the map as proper, kind of with proper map markings, and I walk straight out, I continue the street on top of the sea, there's another neighborhood. So in your real experience on the ground is very different to what you see here, and the city extends into all of these areas. The city is a great deal bigger than it's shown on the map. So this is about the mental models that we have to deal with. And these are the sort of the invisible parts of society, incredibly valuable, but where we haven't added those values to them. And these are the people from our labs. So during the pandemic, we embedded our labs in this amazing area of wetland, and under a watchful eye of the regional immunologist, with people from 26 countries there in person, collaborating, and trying to devise new types of markers that could highlight some of the issues and new ways in which we can mark the life and the cohabitation and all of the values that are present there. So for example, this was one project by Grant Smith, this amazing guy, London art collective, Sound Camp and Sound Tent, and also on Audio Commons, and famous for the yearly broadcast Dawn Chorus from various parts of the world, which they transmit. And he's been part of our community for 10 years. And just with us a few weeks ago in our last labs. And you see these beautiful structures that these creatures make as part of the salt pan. So this is just full of life. And it's beautiful and abstract, but not anthropomorphic. So of course, us as humans, we don't tend to react to it in the way that we do to photos of cats or puppies. And of course, then it requires a different kind of treatment. And so Grant beautifully framed this by saying, we could create sound markers for this, and we could start to listen to life evolving if we can't react to it in the way that we would to other living creatures. And then this project connected to another biosphere in the center of Mexico City, where the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico has access to, but most people in Mexico City don't even know it exists, because for all reasons of colonialism, ownership, exploitation, etc., was always a walled garden, but it's absolutely rich with life and migratory birds and species. And they created sound markers from there. So suddenly we started to connect, because during the pandemic we worked a lot with satellites around the world. And we started to connect projects. Another way of marking something like this is to recognize the fact that these life forms evolve extremely slowly, and the idea of a slowdown in our culture has been erased. Our economic drivers dictate that everything has to be super fast and super optimized, super efficient, etc. And some of the values we are missing because they evolve slowly and they need observation, they need contemplation, they need to be understood properly. And in order to highlight this, there's speculative life forms created with neural nets that drew attention to potential evolutions in these places. And this project has evolved into something really quite extraordinary, because Sophia and Felican started to collaborate with Robertina Szebienic, who's a fabulous artist who works at interspecies communication and integration of species into her art. She's just got her third honorable mention at Ars Electronica, and she's been fellow of Ars Electronica. And this evolved in an enormous project that was on all of the billboards in downtown LA and in galleries and in Barcelona and what have you. So these things go for, because these are acupuncture points. We gather together to start a process, and this process then spins off into these long-term collaborations that can bring great things. So I will show you a little bit from the following year when they came back. I want you to listen to them, the people involved, as to how they think about it. And you'll also hear from Marta de Meneses, another fabulous artist who is investigating the boundary between us and other species, including virology and skin grafting, and very, very interesting and intricate ways to set up art pieces. So I'll just let you listen for a couple of minutes.
And so we have actually some very unique ecosystems here, and they're part of this greater salt marsh system, which actually is, biodiversity-wise very important. There are well over 1,000 species recorded just in this lagoon here.
Artistically, it really inspires us to think of that there are organisms that adapted to these kind of environments.
So how can we engage and see these areas in a new light? What kind of layers can we add to this? Sound, visual, etc., that help sort of somehow bring forth the actual importance of these regions and areas, because they really are important.
So inadvertently, I apparently posed a challenge in one of the sessions the first day, when I asked if people here could make me feel the sound of the ocean.
In this year's MTF, I was lucky enough to have available hydrophones and to dip my ears in the sea and get a lot of interesting, unexpected sounds and create imaginary aquatic soundscapes.
este ano, e então foi algo também que eu nunca explorei literalmente, nunca explorei no meu trabalho como tema central, e achei que era uma boa oportunidade de explorar como a água, como o meio de reprodução de som pode alterar o som, como é que se percepciona e processa diferentes fontes sonoras neste meio, e neste momento sei o objeto, sei que quero trabalhar com vozes e água, ou outras fontes de som acústico e água, a dar-me o luxo de poder explorar, que acho que é importante acontecer aqui também.
So you just saw Moulinex, is one of the most famous DJs and producers, certainly in Portugal, but also worked with Roy Scop and all these really well-known musicians. And this is ocean being used as an instrument as part of our labs on just ocean. So ocean justice, but also just ocean as this kind of force that can engulf you, but can also provide, and also just in the sense that we have established already since 2020, which is the idea of judicious, unbiased, safe and transparent practice, which has now been migrated to some really big also policy-related missions. But here he's actually, this is the first experiment in underwater overtone singing, using also hydrophones, but also a system that was designed by one of the oceanographers, but a veteran oceanographer of the British Oceanographic Society, equipment that was used to measure sound, speed of sound, that was used to measure the rate of glacial melting. This is a new system that they published scientifically. So these are the kinds of collaborations. And we took that into the idea of ecosystem living the year after, because we wondered, how can we question the idea that urban planning divorces us from these environments? It doesn't include them. How do we dismiss spatial planning, which is basically measuring of land and you know, for the purpose of exploitation predominantly. So how do we create strategies for ecosystem living? So living with living ecosystems. And this now starts to take me into the, I will try and, I can see that we're over time, so I will try and run through this part, but I think it's important. Industry came to us from the beginning. Like some of these labs you saw, we had like the VP of the third biggest ICT company in the world in the room saying, can I be with you for a week? Because everybody uses this to up their personal development and to understand how the systems may work, because these experiments really help them. So since industry came to us constantly, and I was put on advisory boards for that in the European Commission, I started to create a set of strategies for infrastructures that we could build to bring industry in the space of common understanding, to create ecosystemic approaches. So what you see here is an ecosystem that was picked up in the mudflats, and you can see very clearly that technology and industry it's strongly enmeshed with everything else in there. You can't escape it. And so the impact that the industry has on all these environments is phenomenal, and we need to have in order to bring people in the space of common understanding, in order to work across all the different domains, we first need systems for understanding, which of course in the data-driven systems that now drive all industry includes interoperability, and we've been working for 3 years on ontology ecosystems across the different domains, so basically how we manage meaning in semantic interoperability. But then this is not the only thing. Once you have a system for understanding, you also need to be able to track attribution, to have certain transparencies to who's contributing what and how to track assets in this system. And this is relevant for artists and creators as much as it is for anything else that is productively generated by our society. So we started by observing this in the artist communities that were co-creating. That was incredibly important to have everybody registered with attribution, and this turned into strategies for IP tracking, intellectual property tracking, which we have been building through these projects. So the first one at the top has yielded something called the Knowledge Graph Alliance, which has all big industry on board. The second one and the third one here, the systems of resilience, where we do parameters for sustainability, is being implemented in the project called READY, which has a huge amount of industrial demonstrators. So really on the ground, working with industry on their real use cases. And then we sit on top of important fundamental, foundational aspects of our society, which are human responsibility. It needs to be embedded in the systems. And once you have human responsibility embedded in a system, you also need to consider what do we sit on top of. We sit on our system of beliefs, which vary. But if we decide, it's not abstract at all, if we decide that societal cultural values include, for example, equity, include people of all kinds of backgrounds, so that we need to monitor biases, and biases are inherent in any data that you collect, then we need to highlight those biases, we need to manage those biases, because that needs to be something that is part and parcel of our system. So we introduced our ideas of just, judicious, unbiased, safe and transparent data into any system that trains models. And of course, if you have that at the base, then you can model current and emerging possibilities, knowing that you are cross-checking all of these parameters, optimized use of resources, inclusion, or managing inclusivity as much as possible. And this is the judicious, unbiased, safe and transparent is now turned into a big project across all industrial domains. We ran 3 weeks ago or so, big labs that had people who manage data for health, mining, transportation, space, you name it. They were all there because we all understand that this is hugely important. Why? I mean, I'll just show you a very simple example. We onboarded the health sector in June with special labs for the health sector at Gokok Health Innovation City, that's mainly owned by AstraZeneca and all of these big players. And of course they are using data, data-driven systems, and they care about stripping data off of, to eliminate issues of privacy from clinical studies. But there's a great deal more to it than just that. If you synthesize data, it has been proven by our colleagues from the University of Linköping that the synthesized data, because it's normalized, all the peaks and troughs are removed, suddenly becomes hugely biased. Because the idea of normal is actually an idea that someone has decided what is normal. And you have to ask yourself, what is this normal? And so what is normal in these systems currently, this is us doing this simple experiment with the health sector saying, okay, we're asking an LMM, large multimedia model, please draw a couple where the woman is taller than the man. It could not do it. Try it. It can't do it. You ask it so many different ways, it just cannot do it. This is what it drew. It drew a giant guy and a tiny girl, and it put Momen on top of his head. Momen? So in the end, the only way we could get it to do it is say that to draw a cartoon where the woman is a giant and the man is a Lilliputian, and then he drew a cartoon that looked like a kind of Disney cartoon. It was completely disproportionate. It just can't do it. Now, of course, if you had knowledge graph to interrogate, this system was interrogating knowledge graph that told it, yes, you can have a woman that's taller than the man, then it would probably try to do it. But it is trained on the web. Come on. I mean, we are using systems that are scooping all, what the web contains. I mean, we know what it contains. So this is where we are, and this is why some of the strategies for just data practice are now starting to be embedded in all of these. We need to have them embedded in the centers of human activity across those different domains in industry. And these are the people who are your machine missionaries in that sense, because these are just some from our 8,500 or so contributors to date in our labs, in a nuclear reactor underground for a week. There are 90 people. actually sending their voices to the moon. This is why that picture's taken, because we went through the Dungaloo radio telescope in the north of the Netherlands. And they were able to get their voice bounced back and into their ear and really leap ahead in terms of moonshots and in terms of what they can test and how we can progress forward as a very diverse community. And all of these people's cultures and their backgrounds and their knowledge need to be reflected in our systems. So on that note, yes, thank you. Sorry, I have gone over time, but thank you.